In October 1948, a small American town began suffocating beneath a cloud of poison. At first, the fog didn't seem unusual. The people of Donora, Pennsylvania, were used to smoke hanging over the streets. The steel mills had filled the air with soot for years, but this time, the smoke didn't disappear. It became thicker, heavier, darker. People could barely see across the street. Children started coughing. Cars stopped moving through town, and soon, people began collapsing in their homes. By the end of the disaster, entire families would struggle to breathe inside a town that had effectively become a gas chamber, all because the air itself had turned deadly. For decades, people in Donora had learned to live with dirty air. The town existed beneath constant smoke from steel mills and zinc plants that operated day and night beside the river. Most residents barely questioned it anymore. Soot collected on windowsills. Clothes hanging outside often came back stained gray. And coughing had become such a normal part of life that many people simply ignored it. But during the final days of October 1948, ordinary routines started breaking apart. Shop owners turned on lights in the middle of the day because customers could barely see inside buildings. Football games were cancelled because players couldn't see across the field. Doctors began receiving unusual numbers of emergency calls from elderly residents struggling to breathe. Some people stopped leaving their homes entirely. Others walked through town holding wet cloths over their mouths. Even inside restaurants and barbershops, the air smelled strange, heavy, metallic. And no matter where people went in Donora, the feeling followed them. By Saturday, life inside Donora no longer felt normal. The fog had become so dense that people struggled to move through town at all. Drivers opened their car doors and leaned out into the street, trying to follow curbs through the smoke. Others abandoned driving entirely. At intersections, visibility dropped so low that even familiar streets became difficult to recognize. Emergency vehicles could no longer move safely without assistance. One firefighter later described guiding ambulances through town by walking in front of them with a flashlight. Inside stores and restaurants, customers sat closer to windows trying to see through the haze outside. The smell in the air had changed. Residents described it as metallic, sharp, acidic. People complained that breathing outside felt painful. Some said their throats felt raw after only a few minutes in the fog. Others developed nosebleeds and severe chest pain. By the afternoon, the town's emergency systems were beginning to fail under the pressure. Telephone lines at local doctors' offices became overwhelmed by non-stop calls from residents struggling to breathe. Patients desperate for help started calling every doctor in town repeatedly, hoping someone would answer faster. At one point, the situation became so chaotic that emergency calls had to be rerouted through the town hall itself. And still, the smoke remained trapped over the valley. The geography of Donora made escape almost impossible. Steep hills surrounded the town on every side, while the polluted air remained sealed beneath warmer air above it. The fog simply stopped moving. Factory smoke, car exhaust, coal furnaces, everything stayed suspended at street level. People later described looking down entire roads and seeing nothing except yellow-gray haze, swallowing the town block by block. Even inside homes, the smell of sulfur drifted through closed windows. Children slept beside wet towels placed beneath doors. Some families attempted to leave Donora completely, but the roads had become too dangerous to drive. By Saturday night, many residents realized the town itself had effectively become trapped beneath its own air. By Sunday morning, the atmosphere inside Donora no longer felt survivable. What had started as strange fog was becoming something far more dangerous. Entire neighborhoods had gone quiet overnight. Porches sat empty, stores opened late, or didn't open at all. Inside small apartments across town, people lay awake listening to coughing through the walls. Some residents later said it sounded as though the entire valley had developed the same illness at once. The most vulnerable collapsed first: elderly residents, people with asthma, heart disease, chronic lung problems. Many had spent decades working inside the mills, but now, simply breathing had become exhausting. Local clinics filled beyond capacity. Doctors moved continuously between patients struggling for air, while nurses attempted to manage oxygen supplies that were disappearing faster every hour. Waiting rooms became overcrowded with families wrapped in coats and blankets, trying to breathe through damp cloths. Some patients arrived barely able to stand. Others never made it to the hospital at all. And still, life inside Donora continued in strange and unsettling ways. That Friday night, the town held its Halloween parade. Children in costumes moved slowly through the haze, described by witnesses as shadows drifting through the fog. The next day, a high school football game was still played beneath the smog. Players could barely see across the field. At times, the bowl disappeared completely into the gray air, but the mills continued operating. The furnaces remained lit through the weekend. Smoke kept pouring from the zinc works. The the steel mills, the coal furnaces lining the valley. For many families, the pollution and the town's survival had become inseparable. The smoke meant jobs, the smoke paid mortgages, the smoke kept food on tables, and nobody wanted to imagine what shutting the mills down might mean. But by Saturday night, the reality had become impossible to ignore. People were dying across Donora, not from fire, not from explosion, not from war, from air. The valley itself had become a sealed chamber. A massive temperature inversion trapped industrial pollution beneath warmer air high above the town, forcing the smoke back down toward the streets over and over again. There was no wind, no visible sky, only dense yellow-gray haze hanging motionless between the hills. Factory smoke, car exhaust, coal fumes, acid particles. Everything remained suspended exactly where people were trying to breathe. Some residents later said the silence disturbed them most. Traffic disappeared, birds vanished, even ordinary street noise seemed swallowed by the fog. And inside homes across Donora, families began realizing something terrifying. The town was no longer waiting for the smog to clear. The town was waiting to survive it. By the end of October 1948, Donora stopped clearing itself. A temperature inversion settled over the Monongahela River valley and trapped the town beneath a layer of warm air high above it. The atmosphere remained sealed shut. The elderly collapsed first. People with asthma, pneumonia, or heart conditions deteriorated rapidly. Others who had seemed healthy only days earlier suddenly found themselves unable to breathe normally. By the time rain finally broke the inversion, 20 people were dead. Thousands more had become seriously ill. Nearly half the town reported the respiratory symptoms in the days that followed. And what happened in Donora shocked the rest of the country. National newspapers covered the disaster. Public health officials launched investigations into industrial air pollution. Scientists studied the valley trying to understand how an American town had effectively suffocated beneath its own atmosphere. In the years after Donora, the disaster became one of the most important environmental warnings in United States history. It helped change how the country viewed air pollution. It influenced early clean air research, public health policy, and future environmental regulation, because Donora revealed something terrifying. Air pollution did not need to look dramatic to become deadly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, and simply stayed too long. When rain finally arrived over Donora, the fog began to break. Slowly, the valley became visible again, but the disaster did not end when the smoke disappeared. Families across town were left grieving relatives who had died during the smog. Thousands of residents continued suffering from breathing problems long after the inversion lifted. Many people in Donora would later say their lungs never fully recovered. What happened in the valley became national news. Newspapers across the United States reported on the disaster. Public health officials, scientists, and government investigators traveled to Donora trying to understand how an American town had been overwhelmed by its own air. In the years that followed, Donora became one of the earliest warnings about the danger of industrial air pollution in modern America. The disaster helped push scientific research into air quality and respiratory illness. It influenced future environmental policy and became part of the long path that eventually led toward modern clean air legislation in the United States. But inside Donora itself, the memory never fully disappeared. Today, the mills are mostly gone. The smokestacks that once dominated the valley no longer define the skyline. Many of the industrial sites have been demolished or abandoned. The streets are quieter now, the air is cleaner, and much of the town looks ordinary again. But the geography remains the same. The steep hills still surround the valley. The river still cuts through the town, and every October, people in Donora still remember what happened there in 1948. Historical markers now stand where the smog once settled. Old photographs preserve images of streets disappearing into haze. Survivors and descendants continued telling the story for decades, so the disaster would not be forgotten. Because Donora was never only about one town in Pennsylvania. It became a warning about what can happen when pollution is treated as normal for too long. A reminder that some disasters arrive not with explosions or fire, but quietly, through the air people breathe every day.